Welcome to Healing Outside the Box. My name is Jean Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and a wellness coach. This is episode 154, and I'm calling it Part 2 of Is Food Addiction a Real Thing or a Bunch of Baloney? Last week, I mentioned the work of a couple of guys by the name of Blumenthal and Gold. They basically said that the same neurological pathways that are involved in the abuse of drugs and alcohol also control food consumption. In other words, if we have that apple pie with ice cream after eating our Thanksgiving dinner, when we're not really hungry, we get this boing thing in our head. That boing thing in our head can be referred to as a dopamine rush. They go on to say, quote, "Work presented in this review strongly supports the notion that food addiction is a real phenomena," end quote. So there's that. And certainly in the nutrition biz, we know that food cravings of all kinds are very real. I've got a short banana story that shows how much we can guess, but how much we really don't know about what's going on in our brain at any one time. Way back in the caveman days, I was working as a dietitian in a hospital when I was summoned to the pediatric ward for a nutrition consult. The person was a teenage boy with a very unique history. Over the previous year, he had been diagnosed with a rare neurological condition. And for some reason that no one could explain, he was only craving bananas. He ate so many bananas that his physician actually became worried. He would give up all foods, even sweets and fatty foods, just to get his hands on more of those bananas. Was there a reason for him to crave those bananas? And did it have anything to do with his recent diagnosis with a serious neurological disease? Well, the physician ordered a nutrition consult, presumably because he wanted me to do some splaining, as Ricky Ricardo might have said, but I didn't have any more idea than his physician did. Do we crave because of something that is missing, that perhaps our mind knows about, but we don't? We still don't know the answer to that question. Is food addiction exactly like a drug or alcohol addiction? Or does it have unique characteristics because food is something that we need to crave for our survival? And really, do we need to crave for our survival anymore? And by anymore, I mean since supermarkets and refrigerators. It's been a long time since the days of Lucy, and by Lucy I mean the first Homo erectus lady in Kenya that apparently was made famous by our Kenyan President Barack Obama. So Lucy existed a long time ago. And since then, and until the recent past, craving for food was absolutely necessary for us to get off our butts and get some food during times when food was scarce. So what I'm trying to say here, and I do realize I'm rambling, is that it's been a relatively short period of time that refrigerators have been around relative to Lucy. And people haven't had much time to do a lot of adapting over the past 50 or 60 years. Between Lucy and refrigerators, there's been a lot of time to think about how important it was to crave food during, say, times of drought or famine due to civil wars, or when it was just too plain cold to go out and kill some food. So from Lucy to refrigerators, the people who had the strongest desire to go out long distances to kill food or labor in the hot sun to grow food survived long enough to have children. Seems fair enough. Now that we have refrigerators in supermarkets with 25 aisles, is it time to relinquish our craving for food altogether, since we really don't need these cravings anymore? Well, that's such a good question that I decided to think about this for today's episode. But don't hold your breath because in the end the answer was, I'm not quite sure. There is no way that I can think about this topic in a numerical fashion, so I'll review a few of the articles from the experts. That would not be me, and let you decide for yourself. I looked up one article that included a list of 21 questions to ask yourself. At the end of those questions was this note: if you answered yes to any of the above questions, then you may be a food addict. That reminds me of that comedian, Jeff Foxworthy, whose entire shtick was, if you da-da-da-da-da-da-da, then you may be a redneck. So if we get one of these questions, are we a food addict? When I looked at this list of 21 questions, I realized that something had to be done about the list. So I separated it into two different lists. I simply felt that some of these questions may relate to the quality of our typical American diet and what it possibly is doing to us. In my opinion, that's a separate issue than some of the symptoms we see in people with other addictions. Here's the questions for list 1. Many of these I think most of us can possibly relate to. Number 1, have you ever wanted to stop eating and found that you just couldn't? Number 2, do you find yourself attempting one diet or food plan and then another with no lasting success? Number 3, do you eat differently in private than you would in front of other people? Number 4, has a doctor or family member ever approached you with concern about your eating habits or your weight? Number 5, do you eat large quantities of food at one time? Hello, it's called Thanksgiving. And also, it doesn't mention whether they mean daily or occasionally. Big difference in my opinion. Number 6, is your weight problem due to nibbling all day? We call them there people grazers in the food biz. Number 7, do you eat when you're not hungry? Well, that's a big fat duh. And I mean that only in the nicest possible way. Number 8, do you frequently feel guilty or ashamed about what you've eaten? Again, here they don't specify whether they mean rarely or daily. Number 9, are you waiting for your life to begin when you lose the weight? Okay, that was list 1. Here is list 2. Some of the things on this list might suggest behavior outside the norms of normal eating behavior. Number 1, do you think about food or your weight constantly? Number 2, do you binge and then get rid of the binge by intentionally vomiting or abusing laxatives? Number 3, do you eat to escape your feelings? Once again, it's assumed that eating a pint of Haagen-Dazs ice cream after a breakup is considered a different thing than doing this daily as a response to all feelings. Some artificial arbitrator of social norms may have come up with that. Number 4, have you ever discarded food only to retrieve it out of the rubbish and eat it later? Number 5, have you ever stolen other people's food? And I want to add to this, do you eat from other people's plates at restaurants? Number 6, have you ever hidden food to make sure that you have enough? Number 7, do you feel driven to exercise compulsively or excessively to control your weight? Number 8, do you obsessively calculate the calories you've burned and compare it to the calories you've eaten? Number 9, do you feel hopeless about your relationship with food? By the way, I'll give you some links in the show notes if you want to read about this in more detail. I think to most of us, it seems common sense that eating comforting foods when you're stressed out is in a different category than, say, having symptoms of bulimia. And in the previous episode, I reviewed that bulimics often binge and purge multiple times per day. That puts bulimia in the category of a psychological illness. I read an article posted on October 23, 2016, called Overcoming Food Addiction, an Instant Escape Method. And I know what you're thinking. Whenever we see the word instant or easy cure, we tend to, figuratively at least, raise our eyebrows a bit, because nothing about this topic is easy. This article tends to lump those two separate lists together and call it one eating behavior. In my opinion, until we learn more about how the brain functions when it comes to food cravings, lumping everything together might only complicate things, because the goal should be to treat any or all types of food addictive behaviors. Another article talked about this woman named Ashley Gerhardt, co-creator of Yale University's food addiction scale. She sees food addiction similar to other addictions in this regard. Quote, people who engage in binge eating, compulsive eating, or excessive overeating are left with similar sensations of misery, end quote. Now, my Wikipedia expert is out to lunch, so I looked up the Wikipedia definition of food addiction. It basically says that it involves withdrawing from activities due to the shame of fluctuating weight, feelings of guilt, feelings as if you've lost control, and feelings of depression or erratic moods. I found it interesting that the sentence doesn't include the word food. Whether or not these people describe it as identical to other addictions, we all know one thing, in that right now something is very wrong. It appears that one of the key components is self-destructive behavior, which is certainly not what we signed up for when we were little babies in our mother's arms. So what are we addicted to? Is it sugar, fatty foods, salty foods, food additives, or is it the absence of something our body needs? Well, that's certainly a good question. I know, I'm asking a lot of these good questions and not answering any of them. But perhaps we can't answer this because we're not sure, and perhaps it's both. If sugar, fat, and salt set off a dopamine, for lack of a better word, high, and we keep chasing that same high with increasing amounts of food, then it is certainly mimicking other addictions. It may also be the case that our brain is smart enough to realize that empty calories don't provide essential nutrients for our survival. Perhaps our bodies will then crave more food to fix that. No pun intended. Well, actually, there was a pun intended. It certainly seems that we don't have enough information to definitely conclude that it is a true addiction exactly like other addictions. And we don't have enough information about the workings of our brain to conclude that this is our brain demanding nutrients that junk food doesn't provide. There's a couple of things we do know. Despite excessive dietary consumption, many obese people have high rates of vitamin and mineral deficiencies. These vitamins and minerals play important roles in glucose metabolism and insulin signaling pathways. And we all know what that means. It means a higher rate of diabetes. In the nutrition biz, the term failure to thrive is a real thing in an overweight or obese person. In other words, it's not just the great tasting junk food that's the problem, or specifically the sugar, fat, or salt content. It's also the absence of nutritional fulfillment. Without this, there is no cue to stop. Satisfaction never arrives. In the book Fat Chance, the author feels that addiction starts from a substance's inability to deliver satisfaction. For example, gambling addicts will tell you that it all started when they won big with a lottery ticket or at the casino. And then, lo and behold, the money didn't solve all of their problems. It's sort of a love-hate relationship that we have with pleasure and pain. And speaking of pain, one of the authors reminded us that the existence of pain is ultimately necessary for our survival. So it might make our brain kind of fluky. The poor guy with the severed leg that still feels pain in that leg knows that the pain is coming from his mind. This sensation of pain tells us to go to the doctors when something is wrong. And that's just a reality that we need to acknowledge. But here's the next question. What if something goes awry? In other words, what if we are in such emotional pain that we cut ourselves because the physical pain is more tolerable? In this sense, the possibility of becoming addicted to food is a reality that we also need to acknowledge. I believe I've mentioned in previous episodes that I've seen a number of women with morbid obesity who were traumatized as children. I saw in one study that they estimated 80% of morbidly obese women were sexually abused as children or teenagers. And sensation of pain and also pleasure can be turned on and off in our response to our perception of our environment. They often give the example of soldiers in the middle of a battle who get shot or wounded severely and still stand up and keep running. They'll say that they couldn't feel the pain sensation until they were safe behind the lines. In another article, they believed that food addiction is unique because food is necessary for our survival, and they go on to defend it. They feel that food addiction is not permanently attached to one specific food. It is the perception of the pleasure we anticipate from these addictive foods. If it's based on the perception of the pleasure that these foods give us, then possibly we can change our perception of what foods give us pleasure. They go on to say that foods high in sugar, fat, and salt overpromise and underdeliver. They are a little like our fearless leader in that regard. Commercials for rich chocolatey goodies promise to whisk us away to a tropical paradise where it never rains and we never gain weight. But then we realize we have been duped when the need for sweets gets greater and greater and the promise of paradise is never delivered. Here is the bottom line, again in my opinion. A nourishing meal is not addictive. It satisfies, and fuels your body, allowing it to grow strong and healthy. Meals can contain sugar or fat, but they have to contain nutrients. Sweet or fatty substances, however, coupled with the absence of nutrition, is addictive, and early childhood trauma stacks the deck against you. So unless we can live on Mars with no oxygen, gravity, or food, we can never see abstinence as an option. We can never eliminate all foods that give us pleasure any more than we can eliminate all foods in general. But I firmly believe that we can choose healthier foods that can also give us pleasure. As soon as I figure out how to do that, I'll discuss it with you next week. Until then, be well and stay tuned next week for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.